Imagine this. You survive one of the deadliest hurricanes your state has ever seen. Your home, the place you worked your whole life for, is still standing strong. But instead of your neighbors celebrating your survival, they turn against you. They don't just whisper behind your back. They accuse you of causing the storm. And then they demand $10 million. This isn't some wild Hollywood script. It's the nightmare that Marcus Johnson lived through. Marcus Johnson wasn't a celebrity, a politician, or a millionaire. He was an everyday man, a hardworking father of two, a husband, and a respected neighbor in his Florida community. Marcus had spent years building the life he dreamed of. He'd bought a modest but beautiful home on a quiet street, one of those neighborhoods where kids played basketball in the driveways, and neighbors waved at each other while mowing their lawns. But what people didn't know about Marcus was how much resilience was built into his DNA. He had grown up poor in the South, raised by a single mother who taught him that survival was never guaranteed. You had to fight for it. That mindset shaped every decision he made, especially when it came to protecting his family. The year was brutal for storms. The weather channels were buzzing about a massive hurricane forming in the Atlantic. They gave it a name people wouldn't forget: Hurricane Elijah. Meteorologists warned it could be one of the strongest storms in decades. While some neighbors shrugged it off at first, Marcus took the warning seriously. He had seen storms before. He knew they could rip apart entire communities in a single night. So he prepared. He reinforced his windows with shutters. He stocked up on water, canned food, batteries, and flashlights. He even checked the foundation of his house, making sure it could withstand heavy winds. His neighbors teased him a little. "Marcus, you act like this is the end of the world." But he didn't care. For Marcus, it wasn't about fear. It was about responsibility. His wife, LaToya, and their two kids were depending on him. The night before the hurricane hit, Marcus sat with his family in the living room. The wind outside was starting to howl, and the sky had turned a strange, deep gray. "Daddy, are we going to be okay?" His youngest daughter, Maya, asked, clutching her stuffed bear. Marcus smiled gently, pulling her close. "We'll be fine, baby. Daddy took care of everything. This house is strong, and so are we." LaToya gave him a quiet look of gratitude. She knew Marcus was trying to stay strong for them all. By evening, the storm was coming fast. The news anchors on TV were urging people to evacuate, their voices shaking with urgency. But for many families, including Marcus's, there was nowhere to go. Hotels were already full. Roads were jammed. The community braced itself. Neighbors hammered boards onto their windows. Cars were moved to higher ground. The air was heavy, not just with humidity, but with fear. And yet, as Marcus double-checked the locks and shutters, he whispered a prayer. "Lord, protect this house. Protect my family." The strangest thing about hurricanes is the silence before they strike. Around midnight, the world outside seemed to hold its breath. The street was eerily quiet. Even the crickets had gone silent. Inside, Marcus and his family sat in their safe room, a windowless space stocked with food and supplies. The kids drifted off to sleep, but Marcus stayed awake, listening. He could almost feel the storm circling, waiting. And then, a low rumble, the sound of wind like a freight train in the distance. The house creaked, as if bracing itself for war. The storm had arrived. What Marcus didn't know was that surviving the hurricane would be the least of his battles. Because when the skies cleared and the waters receded, his real storm was only beginning. Before we move forward, let me ask you something. If you lived in a neighborhood where everyone's homes were destroyed except yours, would you feel blessed? Or would you start to worry that people might look at you differently? Drop your answer in the comments below. I want to hear your take. As the winds roared louder and the storm slammed into the coast, Marcus held his family close. He didn't know if his house would make it through the night. He didn't know if they would make it through the night. But what he couldn't possibly imagine was that by surviving, he would be branded as the enemy. And in the morning light, when the storm passed, his nightmare would only just begin. The wind was screaming like 1,000 voices at once. Trees bent like they were made of rubber. Street signs rattled until they snapped. For most of Marcus's neighbors, the storm felt like the end of the world. But inside the Johnson house, Marcus sat in silence, every nerve on edge. He wasn't just fighting the storm outside, he was fighting the fear inside. At 1:30 a.m., Hurricane Elijah made landfall. The first strike was brutal. Windows in nearby houses shattered. Roofs peeled back like paper. The sound of shattering glass echoed across the block. Marcus could feel the foundation of his home tremble, but his reinforcements held. The shutters clanged but didn't give way. The walls moaned but stayed upright. LaToya squeezed his hand. "Marcus, it's holding! It's holding!" But Marcus didn't respond. He didn't want to give false hope. The storm was only beginning. Through the cracks in the shutter, Marcus caught glimpses of chaos. A neighbor's car floated by, swallowed by the rising floodwaters. A streetlight toppled, sparks hissing as it drowned. And then he heard it, the cries of people. Shouts for help. A desperate banging from across the street. It was the Wilsons, their roof already torn halfway off. Marcus's instinct screamed at him to run out there, to help. But he knew stepping outside would mean suicide. He was trapped. They all were. He held his kids tighter as guilt gnawed at him. Survival had never felt so cruel. The safe room was dark except for a single lantern. The kids were huddled under blankets, the sound of the storm muffled by the walls. "Daddy, is the house gonna fly away?" Maya asked, her eyes wide. Marcus knelt beside her, brushing her hair back. "No, baby. This house is stronger than it looks, and we're stronger than this storm." He said it for her, but deep down he wasn't sure. Hours crawled by. The wind roared, then faded, then roared again. The hurricane moved in waves, each one stronger, each one testing the limits of every home on the block. Around 3 a.m., they heard a thunderous crash. The Johnsons flinched, thinking it was their roof. But when Marcus peeked out, he saw it wasn't their house. It was the Thompsons across the street. Their entire second floor had collapsed into rubble. LaToya gasped. "Oh my God. Marcus, everyone's losing everything," Marcus whispered almost to himself. "Lord, please. Just let us make it until morning." Around 4:15 a.m., everything stopped. Dead silence. The air was eerily still. "The eye," Marcus muttered. He had seen it before on TV. In the center of a hurricane, there's a strange moment of calm. But it's only temporary. The family stepped out of the safe room for the first time in hours. The house was shaken but intact. Windows still sealed. Roof untouched. It looked solid. Too solid. Marcus stepped onto the porch carefully. The neighborhood looked like a battlefield. Cars overturned. Houses gutted. Trees ripped out of the ground like weeds. His home stood there like an island of safety in a sea of destruction. But before he could process it, the wind returned, stronger, louder, more violent. The second half of the storm slammed back with fury. Back inside, the Johnsons huddled together again. The kids cried as the storm howled. LaToya whispered prayers. Marcus stayed still, listening, calculating. Minutes felt like hours. Hours felt like days. But slowly, painfully, the storm began to lose its voice. The howling faded. The pounding rain softened. By dawn, the worst was over. They were alive, and so was their house. When the sun finally rose, Marcus opened the shutters cautiously. His jaw dropped. Everywhere he looked, destruction stretched for miles. Houses flattened. Yards gone. Cars stacked like toys. Families stood outside, staring at what was left of their lives. And then there was his house, the only one on the block still standing. At first, the neighbors looked at him with relief. "Marcus, you made it! Thank God your family's okay." But then the looks changed. Whispers began. Why his house? How come nothing happened to him? That don't look natural. Marcus felt the shift. What should have been gratitude was turning into suspicion. Let me pause here and ask you, if your house was the only one left standing after a hurricane, do you think your neighbors would celebrate with you or start asking questions? Type your honest answer below, because this is exactly where Marcus's nightmare begins. As Marcus helped his children step outside, he could feel dozens of eyes on him. The silence was heavy, heavier than the storm itself. And then a voice cut through the air. "Ain't no way that house stayed up without something funny going on." Marcus froze. He knew in that moment, surviving the hurricane was just the beginning, because now his neighbors were about to become his enemies. You'd think surviving a deadly hurricane would bring people closer. You'd think neighbors would band together, helping each other rebuild. But for Marcus Johnson, survival didn't bring unity. It brought suspicion. The storm had passed, but the whispers had just begun. The morning sun revealed a neighborhood that no longer looked like home. Streets were covered in debris. Power lines dangled dangerously. Families stood in front of what used to be houses, some crying, some silent, all broken. Marcus's house stood tall, almost untouched. A few shingles were missing. A shutter hung loose, but compared to everyone else, it looked like a miracle. At first, neighbors came to him. "Marcus, can we charge our phones in your generator? Do you have some extra water?" He said yes, of course. He shared what he had, but he noticed something in their eyes. It wasn't just gratitude. It was suspicion. It started small. While helping clear fallen branches, Marcus overheard two neighbors talking. "I don't know, man. It don't make sense. Every house gone except his. Yeah, you saw how he was preparing? Almost like he knew something." Marcus froze. He wanted to shout, "I prepared because I care about my family." But he kept quiet. He told himself it was just stress talking. People were grieving. They weren't thinking straight. But deep down, he felt something shift. Over the next few days, the whispers grew louder. Marcus would walk down the block offering to help, but people stared. Conversation stopped when he passed. At a relief center, a neighbor muttered, "Bet he cut some corners building that house. Ain't no way it stood up like that." Another said, "I heard his cousin does voodoo. Maybe he had some kind of protection." Marcus wanted to laugh at the absurdity, but it wasn't funny. The stares, the tone, it wasn't harmless gossip. It was building into something darker. One afternoon, while delivering bottled water, Marcus approached a group of neighbors. They went quiet. One of them, a man Marcus had known for years, spoke up. "Funny how it's your house that made it. Almost like you brought this storm on us." Marcus blinked. "What are you talking about?" "I boarded my windows. I reinforced the house. Anybody could have done it." The man smirked. "Anybody? You mean everybody else here just didn't care enough about their families? That's what you saying?" Marcus felt his blood boil. "No, that's not what I said. I'm saying preparation matters." The man leaned closer. "Well, maybe you had some help. Maybe nature was on your side at our expense." Marcus walked away, but inside he was shaken. This wasn't about preparation anymore. It was about blame. And deep down about something uglier, race. A week later, with cleanup still ongoing, Marcus received a letter. It was from the Homeowners Association, HOA. At first, he thought it might be instructions for disaster relief. Instead, the letter was filled with cold legal language. "The survival of your property during hurricane. Elijah has raised questions about compliance with community standards. The HOA has reason to believe your home's construction may have contributed to the widespread destruction of surrounding properties." Marcus read it 3 times, his hands shaking. They were blaming him for the hurricane. He stormed into the temporary HOA office set up in a local gym. Board members sat at a folding table, clipboards in hand. "You can't be serious," Marcus said, slamming the letter down. "You're accusing me of causing a hurricane?" The chairwoman, a stern woman named Mrs. Whitaker, adjusted her glasses. "We're not saying you caused it directly. We're saying your property may have affected wind patterns, making the storm worse for others." Marcus's jaw dropped. "Wind patterns? This is insane. My house didn't create a hurricane." Mrs. Whitaker gave a thin smile. "Then you'll have no problem proving it. Until then, we'll be conducting a full investigation." Marcus felt the room spinning. This wasn't just whispers anymore. This was official. Word spread fast. By the next day, everyone knew about the HOA's claim. Neighbors looked at Marcus like he was cursed. Some wouldn't let their kids near his yard. Others muttered "Stormbringer" when he passed. Even the families he had helped with food and water now turned their backs. Gratitude was gone, replaced by fear and anger. LaToya tried to reassure him. "Marcus, people are just scared. They lost everything. They need someone to blame." But Marcus shook his head. "This isn't just about fear. This is about me, about who I am. They're not just blaming the storm, they're blaming me. Let me ask you this. If you were Marcus, and your whole neighborhood started accusing you of being the reason their homes were destroyed, how would you fight back? Would you stay quiet or would you take them head on? Drop your answer below, because trust me, things are about to get a whole lot worse for Marcus." That night, Marcus sat on his porch staring at his house. The one thing that had saved his family was now being used as evidence against him. And the whispers no longer sounded like whispers. They sounded like a mob gathering strength. Then came the second letter from the HOA. This time, it wasn't just about an investigation. It was a demand. $10 million. Imagine losing everything in a hurricane, your home, your memories, your sense of safety. Now imagine turning on your neighbor, the one man whose house survived, and demanding that he pay you $10 million. That's exactly what the HOA did to Marcus Johnson. It arrived in a plain white envelope, slipped into Marcus's mailbox like any other piece of mail. But inside, the words hit him like another storm. The HOA hereby demands compensation in the amount of $10 million for damages caused to surrounding properties, attributed to the survival of your home during Hurricane Elijah. Marcus's hands shook. He read it twice, then a third time. Each word was sharper than the last. $10 million, as if surviving was a crime. He stormed into the kitchen, waving the letter. "Latoya, you're not going to believe this. They want $10 million. $10 million. Latoya nearly dropped the cup she was holding. $10 million. Marcus, that's insane. How could they even think? They think my house made the hurricane worse. That because it stood, it somehow redirected destruction onto everyone else." Latoya stared at him, speechless. Then she whispered, "This isn't about the house. This is about you." Marcus clenched his fists. He knew she was right. 2 days later, Marcus walked into a packed community hall. The HOA board sat at the front like judges. Neighbors filled every chair, some standing in the back. All eyes locked on him. Mrs. Whitaker cleared her throat. "Mr. Johnson, we believe your property's unusual survival created airflow. Disruptions that intensified hurricane. Damage to the rest of the neighborhood. As such, we demand restitution." Marcus laughed bitterly. "Airflow disruptions? You're blaming wind science on me?" A man from the crowd shouted, "Yeah, your house saved itself and killed ours!" Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Marcus's voice rose. "Listen to yourselves. This storm destroyed half the state. FEMA says it was one of the strongest in decades. But you think I caused it? My family almost died too. But they didn't want logic. They wanted someone to blame. And Marcus was the easiest target. The HOA presented charts and diagrams they'd pulled from some consultant. They claimed Marcus's roof angle, reinforced shutters, and concrete foundation had created unnatural wind patterns. "Your house," Whitaker declared, "acted like a shield. While you stood safe, your neighbors took the brunt of the storm." Marcus's lawyer, a family friend named Eric, stood up. "That's not science. That's nonsense. Houses don't cause hurricanes. They don't redirect storms. What you're hearing is nothing but scapegoating." But the crowd didn't clap for him. They booed. They hissed. And Marcus felt the walls closing in. From that day on, things got worse. Neighbors stopped talking to him entirely. Parents pulled their kids away when Marcus's children came outside. Someone spray-painted Storm Maker on his fence. Even local businesses treated him differently. At the grocery store, the cashier muttered, "Bet you made a deal with the devil to save that house." Marcus wanted to scream. He wanted to shout the truth. But every time he opened his mouth, no one listened. Eric explained it to him one night. "Marcus, this isn't about winning in court. This is about draining you. They know you don't have $10 million, but they can bury you in legal fees, force you into settlements, maybe even take your house." Marcus shook his head. "So because I survived, I lose everything anyway?" Eric sighed. "That's their plan. They're weaponizing the HOA rules against you." Latoya broke down one evening at the dinner table. "Marcus, I can't take it anymore. The kids are getting bullied at school. People whisper behind my back at church. And now they want money we don't have." Marcus held her hand. "I know, baby, I know. But I can't give in. If I pay them, I admit I'm guilty. And I'm not guilty of surviving." The kids sat quietly, eyes wide. They didn't fully understand, but they felt the weight. This wasn't just a fight for money. This was a fight for dignity. Within weeks, the story hit the news. Local stations ran the headline, "HOA sues black man for surviving hurricane." It went viral. Some people online defended Marcus. "This is pure racism." Others mocked him. "Yeah, right. His magic house caused the storm." Reporters started showing up at his lawn, cameras flashing, neighbors whispering louder. The world was watching. Pause for a second and think, if the entire neighborhood and even a legal board turned against you, accusing you of something you couldn't possibly control, would you fight back in court or pack up and leave? I want to hear your answer because Marcus had to decide fast. One night, As Marcus sat on his porch, staring at the lawsuit papers, Latoya joined him. "What are we gonna do?" she asked softly. Marcus looked at the house, the one place that had protected his family, and whispered, "We fight. We fight them in court. Because if I don't, they'll destroy more than just this house. They'll destroy us." And so the battle moved from the streets to the courtroom. But Marcus had no idea just how dirty the HOA was willing to play. The neighborhood had already turned against Marcus. Now the battle wasn't just about whispers, stares, or spray-painted fences. It was about survival in the courtroom. The HOA wasn't backing down. They had lawyers, money, and influence. Marcus had truth. But in a courtroom, truth alone doesn't always win. The first day of trial, Marcus stepped into the courthouse with his wife Latoya and his lawyer, Eric. The building smelled of polished wood and fear. Reporters crowded the steps, microphones shoved in Marcus's face. "Mr. Johnson, did your house cause the hurricane? Do you have any comment about the $10 million lawsuit?" Marcus kept his head down. Latoya held his arm tightly. Inside, his stomach churned. The courtroom itself was packed. Neighbors filled the benches, their faces cold and unforgiving. On the other side, the HOA board sat in pressed suits, smirking like they had already won. The HOA's lead attorney, a slick man named Charles Griffin, stood tall before the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is not about punishing a man for surviving. This is about responsibility. Mr. Johnson's house was built in a way that defied community guidelines. Its survival was not luck, it was negligence. And because of that, dozens of families lost everything." The words were sharp, rehearsed. He painted Marcus as the villain of the storm. Then Eric stood, his voice steady but passionate. "This case is absurd. My client did what every responsible homeowner should do. He prepared. He reinforced. He protected his family. And now, instead of being praised, he's being persecuted. You cannot sue a man for surviving a natural disaster." The jury shifted uncomfortably. The lines were drawn. When Marcus took the witness stand, the courtroom went silent. He spoke from the heart. "I did everything I could to protect my family. I followed building codes. I worked hard for this house. When the storm came, I prayed we'd make it. And we did. But that's not a crime." Griffin pounced during cross-examination. "Mr. Johnson, isn't it true that your house is the only one on the block with reinforced concrete walls?" "Yes." "And isn't it true you installed storm shutters years before anyone else?" "Yes." "And isn't it also true you refused to pay the HOA's hurricane preparedness fee last year?" The jury leaned forward. Marcus swallowed hard. "Yes, because it was a scam. They couldn't explain where the money was going." Griffin smirked. "So you admit you defied the HOA. You admit you thought you knew better than everyone else. And conveniently, your house is the only one left standing." "Interesting, isn't it?" Murmurs filled the courtroom. Marcus felt his heart sink. Outside the courthouse, the story exploded. Headlines screamed, "HOA versus hurricane survivor. Man sued for living through storm. Hero or villain? Community demands justice." Talk shows debated it. Some called Marcus a symbol of resilience. Others accused him of arrogance. Social media was a war zone, half supporting him, half mocking him with memes about Storm Man. The pressure was unbearable. Latoya barely slept. The kids were bullied at school. Marcus himself felt like a prisoner in his own life. One evening, after a long day in court, Eric slammed a folder onto Marcus's table. "I think I found something," he said, eyes burning. "The HOA's so-called preparedness fee, the one you refused to pay, the money didn't go to safety upgrades. It went straight into private accounts." Marcus leaned forward. "You're saying they've been stealing?" Eric nodded. "I can't prove it yet. But if we can, this whole case falls apart. They're not after you because of your house. They're after you because you didn't play their game." Marcus felt hope spark for the first time in weeks. On the third week of trial, Eric dropped the bomb. "Your Honor, we have reason to believe the HOA has been misusing funds meant for hurricane preparedness. Instead of helping families, they lined their own pockets. And when my client refused to pay, they made him their scapegoat." Gasps echoed through the courtroom. The HOA board shifted nervously. Griffin jumped up. "Objection! This is irrelevant!" But the judge leaned forward. Overruled. "Continue, Mr. Eric." The jury's eyes were wide now. Not at Marcus, but at the board. The tide was turning. Now let me ask you, if you discovered the very people accusing you were hiding corruption, would you expose them? Even if it put a target on your back? Think about it, because Marcus was about to put everything on the line. As court adjourned that day, Marcus felt a shift in the air. For the first time, the crowd didn't look at him like a villain. They looked at the HOA with suspicion. Eric leaned in and whispered, "We're close, real close." "But Marcus, once we reveal everything, they won't just want money. They'll want revenge." Marcus looked around the courtroom, at the people who once called him neighbor, and whispered back, "Let them come. I've survived worse." But he had no idea. The darkest truths were still waiting to be exposed. Every courtroom has a breaking point, the moment when truth slices through lies like lightning in a storm. For Marcus Johnson, that moment was coming. And when it hit, it wouldn't just shake the HOA, it would expose the rotten core of the entire neighborhood. After weeks of trial, Marcus's lawyer, Eric, refused to sleep. He spent night after night combing through documents, chasing paper trails. Finally, he burst into Marcus's living room one morning, eyes bloodshot but triumphant. "I found it," Eric said, dropping a stack of files on the table. The HOA wasn't just misusing the preparedness fund. They were committing insurance fraud. Marcus frowned. "Insurance fraud?" Eric nodded. They inflated damage reports after past storms, claimed repairs that never happened. And the preparedness fees? They funneled them into offshore accounts. Millions of dollars, Marcus. This whole lawsuit against you, it's a distraction. They needed a scapegoat. Marcus's hands shook. "So they picked me. The black man whose house didn't fall." Eric met his eyes. "Exactly." The next day in court, Eric was ready. He called a surprise witness, a former HOA accountant. Nervous and sweating, the man shuffled to the stand. Eric asked calmly, "Mr. Daniels, did the HOA ever direct you to falsify financial records?" The man swallowed. "Yes." Gasps filled the courtroom. Eric pressed harder. "And did those falsified records include hurricane relief funds?" "Yes." "Did the board profit personally from those funds?" "Yes." The room erupted. Jurors leaned forward. Neighbors whispered. Reporters scribbled like mad. Griffin, the HOA lawyer, jumped to his feet. "Objection. This is irrelevant to the case." But the judge pounded his gavel. Overruled. "The jury will hear this." Marcus watched as the truth spilled out. And for the first time, the board members didn't look smug. They looked terrified. When Marcus took the stand again, he didn't speak like a victim. He spoke like a man reclaiming his dignity. "My house didn't cause a hurricane. My house survived because I worked hard, because I prepared, because I refused to cut corners. But instead of asking how they could rebuild stronger, this board accused me. Why? Because I wouldn't pay into their corrupt system. Because I said no to being robbed." His voice cracked with emotion. "And because of that, they tried to destroy me. But I will not let them. Not for my wife. Not for my children. Not for the truth." The jury sat in stunned silence. Even some of his neighbors looked away in shame. As evidence piled up, bank statements, forged receipts, offshore transfers, the HOA's defense collapsed. Board members whispered angrily among themselves, pointing fingers, blaming each other. By the end of the week, 2 board members had resigned. Investigators launched a criminal probe, and the once powerful HOA looked like a sinking ship. But Marcus knew better than to celebrate early. People that desperate, that corrupt, they didn't go down quietly. One night, Marcus came home to find his garage. Door spray painted. Again, this time in bold red letters. "Pay or pay the price." LaToya gasped. "Marcus, they're threatening us." Marcus clenched his jaw. "Let them. They can take their threats. They can take their lies. But they won't take my soul." Still, he doubled the locks, kept the lights on, and made sure his kids slept close. Surviving a storm was one thing. Surviving revenge was another. As the trial unfolded, the media narrative shifted. Reporters who once mocked Marcus now painted him as a fighter. Headlines read, "HOA scandal. Millions stolen from hurricane victims. Survivor becomes whistleblower." The man they tried to blame for the storm. People across the country began donating to Marcus's legal defense. Strangers sent letters of support. For the first time, Marcus felt like the world believed him. But he still had to convince 12 jurors. In the last week of testimony, Eric presented the smoking gun. An email from Mrs. Whitaker herself, the HOA chairwoman. It read, "If Johnson won't pay the fee, we'll make an example out of him. Nobody defies this board and gets away with it." The courtroom gasped. The jury looked horrified. Whitaker's face turned pale. Eric turned to the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case was never about a hurricane. It was about power, about control. And when Marcus Johnson refused to be controlled, they tried to destroy him. Not because he was guilty, but because he was brave. Let me ask you this. If you were sitting on that jury, hearing about stolen funds, false accusations, and threats, what would you do? Would you side with the HOA, or would you stand with Marcus? Think hard, because the jury's decision was about to change everything. As closing arguments wrapped, Marcus sat at the defense table, his heart pounding. The jury filed out to deliberate. LaToya whispered, "No matter what happens, you fought. You didn't let them break you." Marcus nodded, gripping her hand. But inside, fear gnawed at him. Juries were unpredictable. And if they sided with the HOA, it would be the end. Hours later, the bailiff's voice echoed through the courtroom. "The jury has reached a verdict." The air inside the courtroom was so heavy, it felt like nobody could breathe. The jury had returned. Their faces were unreadable, stone cold, serious, holding the fate of Marcus Johnson in their hands. For weeks, Marcus had been accused of the unthinkable. For weeks, he had been painted as a villain. Now, in a matter of seconds, his entire future would be decided. The foreman stood, a folded piece of paper in his trembling hand. In the case of the Homeowners Association versus Marcus Johnson, the courtroom went silent. Not a cough, not a shuffle, just silence. "See the jury, find the defendant." LaToya gripped Marcus's hand so tightly her nails dug into his skin. "Not guilty." The room erupted. Some gasped. Some cheered. Others muttered angrily. But Marcus heard none of it. His knees went weak. Tears filled his eyes. He had survived. Not just the hurricane, but the trial of his life. LaToya threw her arms around him. Eric patted his back, whispering, "We did it, Marcus. We beat them." The judge wasn't done. With the fraud evidence revealed, the HOA board faced their own reckoning. Mrs. Whitaker and 2 other board members were indicted for embezzlement and fraud. Investigators swarmed the HOA offices. The empire they had built on fear and money crumbled overnight. Neighbors who once glared at Marcus now looked confused, ashamed, even apologetic. Some approached him quietly. "Marcus, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have believed them. We were scared. We didn't know." But Marcus didn't reply. Forgiveness wasn't that simple. Even with the legal victory, life didn't magically go back to normal. The Johnson kids struggled at school. Whispers followed them in hallways. LaToya had trouble trusting people at church. And Marcus, though he smiled in front of cameras, carried scars no one could see. Late at night, he'd sit on the porch staring at his house. The very house that started it all. He loved it, yes. It had saved his family, but it had also made them a target. Sometimes he wondered, was it worth it? The neighborhood was never the same. Some people rallied around Marcus, calling him a hero. Others still muttered that he had gotten lucky or rigged something. The divide cut deep. Cookouts, block parties, casual waves from porches, those things disappeared. The storm had destroyed more than houses. It had destroyed trust. And Marcus felt it every time he walked down the street. One evening, Eric stopped by with good news. "Marcus, you could sue them back. Wrongful accusation, emotional distress. You could get damages." But Marcus shook his head. "I don't want their money. I just want peace." Eric frowned. "Peace doesn't come free. You sure about this?" Marcus nodded. "I fought to clear my name. That's all I needed. I don't want to drag my family through more courtrooms." It was noble, but it was also heavy. Because choosing peace meant carrying the pain in silence. National media ran his story for weeks. Headlines read, "Man falsely sued after surviving hurricane winds in court. HOA corruption exposed. A survivor's fight for justice." Talk shows invited him to speak. Strangers sent letters of support. Some even called him a symbol of strength. But Marcus didn't feel like a symbol. He felt like a man who had barely survived 2 storms, one from nature, one from people. One night, as Marcus tucked his daughter Maya into bed, she whispered, "Daddy, are the bad people gone now?" Marcus's chest tightened. Yes, baby. They can't hurt us anymore. She smiled sleepily. So we can just be happy again? Marcus kissed her forehead. We'll try, sweetheart. We'll try. Her words stuck with him long after she fell asleep. Could they really be happy again? Or had the storm left a permanent shadow? Let me pause and ask you this. If you were Marcus, if you won the case but lost your community, your peace, your sense of safety, would you call it victory? Or would you feel like the storm still followed you? Tell me what you think, because this question haunted Marcus every single day. Weeks later, Marcus was sitting at his kitchen table, sipping coffee when the TV blared with breaking news. Another storm. A new hurricane, bigger than Elijah, was forming off the coast. The reporter's words echoed in his mind. Residents are urged to prepare immediately. This storm could be catastrophic. Marcus froze, the mug slipping from his hand and shattering on the floor. It was happening again. But this time, he wasn't just a survivor. He was the man everyone would look to. The ocean doesn't forget. Just when people start to feel safe, it roars back, reminding them who's really in charge. For Marcus Johnson, the warning of another hurricane wasn't just weather, it was déjà vu, a haunting echo of the storm that had nearly destroyed his life. But this time things were different. News spread fast. Stores were raided. Gas stations had mile-long lines. Families boarded up windows, packed cars, and whispered about evacuation. Neighbors who once mocked Marcus now knocked on his door. Marcus, how did your house survive last time? What do we do? The same people who turned their backs during the trial now begged him for advice. The irony wasn't lost on him. LaToya looked at him with questioning eyes. What are you going to do? Marcus sighed. What I always do, prepare, protect, and maybe this time help them too. Marcus set to work, checking his shutters, securing supplies, reinforcing weak spots. But he didn't stop there. He walked to his neighbors' homes, offering guidance. Your windows won't hold like that. Let me show you. Don't tape the glass, that's a myth. Use plywood instead. Make sure your generator's outside, not in the garage. Carbon monoxide kills. At first, some resisted. Pride is hard to swallow. But fear of the storm was stronger. Slowly, house by house, Marcus became the leader they never wanted, but desperately needed. Days later, the hurricane made landfall. The sky turned black, winds howled like monsters, and rain slammed against rooftops. Marcus's house once again stood strong. But this time, something remarkable happened. So did many of his neighbors' homes. Because of his guidance, fewer houses collapsed. Families huddled together, terrified but safe. Through the noise of the storm, Marcus heard something he hadn't heard in years, his neighbors shouting his name with gratitude. When morning came, the damage was undeniable. Streets were flooded. Trees snapped in half, cars crushed, but the destruction wasn't total. For once, survival wasn't limited to one house. The neighborhood had endured, together. Reporters showed up again, cameras rolling. Only this time, they didn't call Marcus a villain. They called him a hero. Weeks later, Marcus got an unexpected letter in the mail from Mrs. Whitaker, the disgraced former HOA chairwoman, now awaiting trial for fraud. The letter was short. You were right. The storm proved it. I hope one day you'll forgive us. Marcus read it twice, then tucked it away in a drawer. Forgiveness didn't come easy. But maybe, just maybe, time would soften the wound. One evening, Marcus sat on his porch watching the sunset. LaToya brought him sweet tea and the kids played in the yard. For the first time in a long time, he felt peace. The house, the storm, the trial, it had all left scars. But it had also left strength. He realized his legacy wasn't about a house standing tall. It was about standing tall himself. He turned to LaToya and said, maybe the storm wasn't meant to destroy us. Maybe it was meant to reveal us. She smiled. And you, Marcus? You showed them who you really are. Word of Marcus's story spread far beyond his neighborhood. Community leaders invited him to speak about preparedness. Schools asked him to share his story with students. He became a quiet symbol of resilience. Not because he was perfect, but because he endured. Marcus Johnson, the man once accused of causing a hurricane, was now teaching people how to survive them. And now I ask you, what would you do if life's storm tried to break you? Would you let it define you, or would you rise stronger? So others could stand beside you? Because Marcus's story isn't just about a house. It's about all of us. That night, as thunder rumbled faintly in the distance, Marcus looked at his home. It wasn't just wood and concrete anymore. It was a symbol, a reminder. Storms will come, whether from the sky or from people. But survival isn't about avoiding the storm. It's about facing it head-on, refusing to bend, and teaching others how to stand tall, too. Marcus whispered to himself, almost like a prayer. I survived the storm. I survived the trial, and I'll survive whatever comes next. And with that, the man who once stood alone now stood with an entire community, stronger than the storm itself.